The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Buckingham Palace as Camilla Parker Bowles hurriedly packed her belongings into a worn leather suitcase. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded each garment, the weight of her decision pressing heavily on her shoulders. The palace had been her home for years, but today it felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. Camilla had always been a woman of strong will and determination. Born into a middle-class family, she never imagined she would one day walk the corridors of the most famous palace in the world. Her journey to becoming queen consort had been filled with controversy, public scrutiny, and personal sacrifices that few could understand. The British press had been particularly harsh, painting her as the villain in a fairy tale that had gone tragically wrong. The relationship with Charles had begun innocently enough decades ago, when they were both young and free. Life had taken them on different paths, leading to marriages with other people, children, and responsibilities that seemed to pull them further apart. Yet fate had a way of bringing them back together, though not without tremendous cost to everyone involved. The death of Princess Diana had changed everything. The public's grief was immense, and Camilla found herself at the center of a storm she never wanted to be part of. The blame, the hatred, the constant criticism from strangers who knew nothing about her true character. It all began to take its toll. She had tried to be strong, to support Charles through his own struggles, and to slowly win over a nation that seemed determined to reject her. Years passed, and gradually some people began to see her differently. Her charitable work, her dedication to various causes, and her genuine care for the royal duties started to shine through the negative press. She worked tirelessly to support organizations helping victims of domestic violence, promoted literacy programs, and championed causes close to her heart. Slowly but surely, public opinion began to shift, though there were still many who would never accept her. The coronation had been a moment of triumph and terror combined. Standing beside Charles as he became king, Camilla felt the weight of the crown that would soon rest upon her own head. The ceremony was beautiful, steeped in tradition and pageantry that took her breath away. Yet even in that moment of glory, she could feel the eyes of critics watching, waiting for her to make a mistake. The pressure of royal life was unlike anything she had experienced before. Every movement was scrutinized, every word analyzed, every decision questioned. The protocol, the endless engagements, the constant need to be on in public, it was exhausting. She missed the simple pleasures of her former life, walking her dogs without a security detail, shopping for groceries, having coffee with friends without it becoming front-page news. Charles tried his best to support her, but he had his own struggles as the new monarch. The transition from Prince of Wales to King brought its own set of challenges, and sometimes Camilla felt like they were both drowning in responsibilities neither of them had fully prepared for. The palace staff was professional but distant, and she often felt like an outsider trying to fit into a world with rules she was still learning. The breaking point came during a particularly difficult week when several tabloids published harsh critiques of her performance at a state dinner. The articles were cruel and personal, attacking not just her actions but her appearance, her background, and her worthiness to hold the title of queen consort. She had developed thick skin over the years, but this latest barrage of criticism felt different, more vicious and unrelenting. That night, lying in the grand four-poster bed that had once belonged to previous queens, Camilla made a decision that had been building in her heart for months. She could not continue living this way, under constant scrutiny and criticism, feeling like she was failing at a job she never truly wanted. The royal life, for all its privileges and luxuries, had become a golden cage that was slowly suffocating her spirit. She began planning her escape carefully, knowing that leaving would not be simple or without consequences. Royal protocol did not allow for casual departures, and she would need to be strategic about how and when she left. The idea of starting fresh in another country, perhaps somewhere she could blend in and live a quiet, anonymous life, became increasingly appealing. Camilla researched various destinations where she might find peace and solitude. She thought about small villages in France, quiet coastal towns in Italy, or perhaps a cottage in the Irish countryside where she could tend a garden and live simply. The fantasy of such a life sustained her through the darkest moments of her royal duties. She started setting aside personal items that held special meaning, photographs from happier times, jewelry that had been gifts from loved ones, books that had brought her comfort over the years. These treasures would come with her to whatever new life awaited beyond the palace walls. The decision to leave was not made lightly. She thought about Charles and how her departure would affect him and his reign. She considered the public reaction and the media frenzy that would undoubtedly follow. But ultimately, she realized that she could not sacrifice her mental health and happiness for the sake of an institution that seemed determined to reject her no matter how hard she tried. As she continued packing that morning, Camilla felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the end of a chapter that had defined so much of her adult life, but relief at the prospect of freedom from the constant judgment and criticism. She was 76 years old, and she wanted to spend whatever years remained to her in peace and contentment, surrounded by people who loved and accepted her for who she truly was. The suitcase was nearly full now, containing the essentials for starting over in a new place. She had arranged for additional belongings to be shipped later, once she had settled somewhere safe and secure. Her heart raced as she realized that within hours, she would be leaving the palace for the last time, walking away from a life that had brought her both great joy and tremendous pain. Little did she know that her carefully laid plans were about to encounter an unexpected obstacle that would change everything. Captain James Morrison had been serving as a palace guard for over 15 years, and he prided himself on his attention to detail and unwavering loyalty to the crown. At 42, he was one of the most respected members of the palace security team, known for his sharp eyes and ability to sense when something was amiss. This particular morning felt different, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. James had grown up in a military family, with his father serving in the Royal Navy and his grandfather in the Army. Service to the crown was in his blood, and he had never questioned his dedication to protecting the royal family. He had witnessed many changes during his tenure, from the passing of Queen Elizabeth II to the coronation of King Charles III, and through it all, he had remained steadfast in his duties. The palace was a complex ecosystem of servants, staff, and security personnel, all working together to maintain the smooth operation of one of the world's most important residences. James knew every corridor, every entrance and exit, every routine and protocol. He could spot unusual behavior from across a crowded room, and his colleagues often joked that he had eyes in the back of his head. On this morning, James was conducting his regular patrol of the residential quarters when he noticed increased activity near the Queen Consort's chambers. Staff members were moving about with more urgency than usual, and there was a tension in the air that made him pay closer attention to what was happening around him. As he walked past Camilla's suite, he caught a glimpse through the partially open door and saw her packing a large suitcase. This in itself was not unusual. Members of the royal family traveled frequently for official engagements and personal trips. However, something about the way she was packing, the urgency in her movements, and the types of items she was selecting struck him as odd. James had been trained to observe and analyze behavior patterns, and what he was witnessing did not match the typical preparation for a royal engagement or planned vacation. The Queen Consort was packing personal items, mementos, and clothing that suggested a longer absence than any official trip would require. There were no travel arrangements in the official palace schedule, no security briefings about upcoming trips, and no advance teams being deployed. His instincts told him that something significant was happening, and his training dictated that he should investigate further without alarming anyone or jumping to conclusions. James positioned himself strategically where he could observe the situation while appearing to conduct his normal patrol duties. Over the next hour, he watched as Camilla continued her preparations with the methodical efficiency of someone who had thought through every detail. She was selecting items carefully, wrapping them in tissue paper, and arranging them in the suitcase with the precision of someone who knew she might not have another opportunity to retrieve forgotten belongings. James noticed that she was not being assisted by her usual lady-in-waiting or personal staff, which was highly unusual for any royal departure. Members of the royal family rarely handled their own packing, and the absence of the typical entourage suggested that this departure was not officially sanctioned or even known to the palace administration. The more he observed, the more convinced he became that the Queen Consort was planning to leave the palace without proper authorization. This presented him with a difficult dilemma. On one hand, his duty was to protect the royal family, which could include protecting them from making decisions that might harm their position or safety. On the other hand, he had to respect their autonomy and privacy. James had always admired Camilla's resilience and grace under pressure. He had witnessed firsthand the challenges she faced as queen consort, the constant scrutiny from the media, and the criticism from those who had never accepted her role in the royal family. He had seen her work tirelessly for charitable causes, attend countless engagements with dignity and poise, and support the king through his transition to the throne. However, his personal feelings could not override his professional responsibilities. If the queen consort was planning to leave without proper security arrangements or official approval, it could create a crisis for the monarchy and potentially put her in danger. James knew that he had to act, even though it meant possibly betraying someone he genuinely respected. He quietly radioed his supervisor, requesting a private meeting to discuss a sensitive security matter. Within minutes, he was briefing the head of palace security about his observations and concerns. The decision was made quickly. James would approach the queen consort diplomatically and attempt to understand her intentions while ensuring that she did not leave the palace without proper procedures being followed. As James walked toward Camilla's chambers, his heart was heavy with the knowledge that he was about to interrupt what was clearly a deeply personal and important moment for her. He understood that she was likely seeking freedom from the pressures of royal life, and he sympathized with her desire for privacy and peace. However, his oath to protect the crown and maintain palace security took precedence over his personal feelings. He knocked gently on the doorframe and cleared his throat to announce his presence. When Camilla looked up from her packing, he could see the surprise and concern in her eyes. She had been caught in the middle of her escape preparations, and both of them knew that this moment would change everything. James spoke with the utmost respect and professionalism, explaining that he had observed her preparations and was concerned about her safety and the security implications of any unscheduled departure. He emphasized that his primary concern was her well-being, and that he was there to help ensure that any travel plans were conducted safely and appropriately. Camilla's reaction was a mixture of disappointment, frustration, and resignation. She had been so close to freedom, so close to walking away from the pressures and criticisms that had been weighing her down for years. The discovery of her plans by palace security meant that her carefully orchestrated escape would now become a complex diplomatic and administrative situation. The conversation that followed was delicate and emotional, with James trying to balance his professional duties with his genuine concern for Camilla's well-being, while she struggled with the realization that even her desire for privacy and freedom was subject to palace protocol and security considerations. This confrontation marked the beginning of a series of events that would test everyone involved and ultimately reveal the complex human emotions and relationships that exist behind the formal facade of royal life. The silence in the room was deafening as Camilla and James stared at each other, both understanding the gravity of the situation they now found themselves in. Camilla slowly set down the silk scarf she had been folding and straightened her shoulders, calling upon the dignity and composure that had served her well through countless difficult moments in her public life. "Captain Morrison," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the turmoil she felt inside, "I suppose you have questions about what you've observed here today." Her tone was neither defensive nor apologetic, but rather carried the weight of someone who had made a difficult decision and was prepared to face the consequences. James felt the heavy responsibility of his position weighing on him as he stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind him to ensure their conversation would remain private. He had great respect for the queen consort and understood that this was not a moment for rigid protocol, but rather for human compassion combined with professional duty. "Your Majesty," he began carefully, "my primary concern is your safety and well-being. Any departure from the palace requires specific security arrangements and coordination with multiple departments. I'm here to understand your intentions and to ensure that whatever you're planning can be done safely and appropriately." Camilla moved to sit in the elegant armchair by the window, her movements graceful despite the emotional storm raging within her. She gestured for James to take a seat across from her, temporarily setting aside the formal barriers that typically existed between royalty and palace staff. "You're a perceptive man, Captain," she said with a sad smile. I've been watching you work for years and I've always appreciated your dedication and discretion. I suppose it was foolish of me to think I could pack and leave without anyone noticing, especially someone with your keen eye for detail. James maintained his professional demeanor while allowing a hint of warmth to enter his voice. Ma'am, in my 15 years here, I've learned that the royal family faces pressures and challenges that most people cannot imagine. If you're feeling the need to leave, there must be serious reasons behind that decision. Camilla's composure began to crack slightly as she looked out the window at the palace gardens, where she had spent many peaceful moments over the years. Do you know what it's like, Captain, to wake up every morning knowing that millions of people are analyzing your every move, your every word, your every expression? To know that no matter how hard you try, how much good you do, there will always be those who see you as unworthy, as an intruder in a story they believe you have no right to be part of. The pain in her voice was evident, and James found himself moved by her vulnerability. He had witnessed the constant scrutiny she faced and had often admired her strength in dealing with it. Ma'am, I've observed your work and dedication over the years. Your charitable efforts, your support for the king, your commitment to your duties. These things haven't gone unnoticed by those of us who serve here. Camilla turned back to face him, tears glistening in her eyes. But it's not enough, is it? It's never enough. Every public appearance is dissected, every outfit criticized, every interaction analyzed for hidden meanings. I'm 76 years old, Captain. I've lived through a divorce, raised children, lost loved ones, and survived decades of public scrutiny. I just want to live my remaining years in peace. James understood the depth of her exhaustion and frustration, but he also knew the implications of her leaving without proper procedures. Ma'am, if I may speak freely, your departure without official coordination would create significant challenges. The media attention alone would be overwhelming, and your safety could be compromised without proper security arrangements. I've thought about that, Camilla replied, her voice growing stronger as she explained her reasoning. I have friends abroad who have offered me sanctuary, places where I could live quietly and anonymously. I don't need the trappings of royal life, Captain. I just need peace and the freedom to be myself without constant judgment. James leaned forward slightly, his expression serious but compassionate. Ma'am, I understand your desire for privacy and peace. However, as Queen Consort, your movements and whereabouts are matters of national security and public interest. Even if you personally wish to step away from royal duties, there are legal and constitutional implications that must be considered. The weight of protocol and duty pressed down on both of them as they sat in that beautifully appointed room, surrounded by the luxury and formality that represented everything Camilla was trying to escape from. She looked at the half-packed suitcase, then back at James, realizing that her carefully planned escape was becoming increasingly complicated. What happens now? She asked quietly.
Do you report this to your superiors?
Does it become a palace crisis? Do I lose even the small amount of privacy I have left? James considered his words carefully before responding. Ma'am, my immediate concern is ensuring that any decisions you make are made safely and with proper consideration of all factors involved. Perhaps there are alternatives we haven't considered yet, ways to address your concerns while maintaining the security and stability that your position requires. Camilla stood and walked to her dressing table, where photographs of her children and grandchildren were displayed alongside official royal portraits. The contrast between her personal life and her public role was stark and poignant. I've tried to find balance, Captain. I've tried to be the queen consort that the country needs while remaining true to myself. But the cost has been enormous. Ma'am, James said gently, would you be willing to speak with someone about these concerns before making any final decisions? Perhaps there are solutions or accommodations that could be made to address some of the pressures you're facing. The suggestion hung in the air between them as Camilla weighed her options. She knew that once palace officials became involved, her situation would become a matter of state business rather than personal choice. Yet she also recognized that James was offering her a lifeline, a chance to explore alternatives before taking the irreversible step of walking away from everything. And if I refuse? She asked, testing the boundaries of her situation. If I insist on proceeding with my plans? James's expression grew more serious as he responded with professional directness. Ma'am, I'm afraid I cannot allow you to leave the palace without proper authorization and security arrangements. It would be a dereliction of my duty to the crown and to your personal safety. The reality of her situation became crystal clear to Camilla in that moment. Despite her royal title and position, she was not truly free to make this choice on her own terms. The golden cage that had felt increasingly suffocating was proving to have locks that she could not simply walk away from. The realization that she was essentially a prisoner in her own home hit Camilla like a physical blow. She sank back into her chair, the weight of her circumstances settling heavily upon her shoulders. The irony was not lost on her that she held one of the most prestigious titles in the world, yet she could not make the simple decision to leave and seek peace elsewhere. James watched her carefully, his heart aching for the woman who had shown such strength and grace under impossible circumstances. He had not wanted to be the one to deliver this harsh reality, but his duty left him no choice. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken understanding of the complex situation they both found themselves in. "I need to make some calls," James said finally, his voice gentle but firm. "There are protocols that must be followed, and people who need to be informed of this situation. I want to assure you, ma'am, that I will handle this with the utmost discretion and respect for your privacy." Camilla nodded slowly, understanding that the wheels of palace bureaucracy were now set in motion, and there was no stopping them. "Will you need to confiscate my belongings?" she asked, looking at the suitcase that represented her hopes for freedom. "For now, yes," James replied regretfully. "Everything will be catalogued and kept safe, but we need to secure all items until the appropriate officials can review the situation and determine the best course of action." The next hour passed in a blur of activity, as James coordinated with his superiors in various palace departments. Camilla watched from her chair as her personal belongings were carefully removed from the suitcase and documented by palace staff. Each item represented a memory, a piece of her identity that she had hoped to carry with her to a new life. The private secretary to the king arrived first, followed by the master of the household and the palace's senior legal advisor. Camilla found herself surrounded by officials whose job it was to manage crises and maintain the stability of the monarchy. She felt like a problem to be solved rather than a person in distress. Sir Geoffrey Hamilton, the private secretary, was a man in his 60s who had served the royal family for decades. He approached the situation with the careful diplomacy that his position required. But Camilla could see the concern in his eyes as he took in the gravity of what had almost occurred. "Your Majesty," Sir Geoffrey began formally, "we need to understand the full scope of your concerns and intentions. This is obviously a serious matter that requires careful consideration of all parties involved." Camilla straightened in her chair, calling upon the dignity that had served her well through countless difficult situations. "Sir Geoffrey, I appreciate that this has created complications for everyone. However, I hope you can understand that my desire for privacy and peace is not unreasonable for a woman of my age who has served the crown faithfully for many years." The legal advisor, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Thornton, stepped forward with documents in her hand. "Ma'am, there are constitutional and legal implications to consider. Your role as queen consort involves certain obligations and responsibilities that cannot simply be set aside without proper procedures and considerations." "I understand the legal complexities," Camilla replied, her voice growing stronger as she defended her position. "But surely there must be precedents for members of the royal family who have chosen to step back from their duties and live more private lives." The master of the household, Lord Pemberton, cleared his throat delicately. "Ma'am, while there have been instances of royals reducing their public roles, the situation of a queen consort is somewhat unique. Your position is deeply intertwined with that of His Majesty the King, and any changes would need to be carefully coordinated." As the officials discussed protocols and procedures, Camilla felt increasingly like a spectator in her own life. The conversation was about her future, her desires, yet she felt removed from the decision-making process. The weight of centuries of tradition and protocol seemed to be crushing her individual autonomy. James stood quietly by the door, observing the proceedings with a heavy heart. He had tremendous respect for the officials doing their jobs, but he also felt deep sympathy for Camilla's plight. He had seen her dedication and sacrifice over the years, and he understood her desire for freedom from the relentless scrutiny and criticism. "What if we were to explore options for reducing Her Majesty's public engagements?" Sir Geoffrey suggested diplomatically. Perhaps there are ways to address her concerns while maintaining the essential functions of her role. Margaret Thornton consulted her documents before responding. There are possibilities for scaling back certain duties, but the constitutional role of Queen Consort cannot be entirely abandoned without significant legal and procedural steps. Camilla listened to them discuss her future as if she were not in the room. The frustration that had been building for months finally reached a breaking point. "Gentlemen, lady," she said firmly, standing to reclaim some measure of control over the conversation. "I appreciate your dedication to protocol and procedure, but I am not a problem to be managed or a crisis to be contained. I am a human being who has reached the limits of what she can endure." The room fell silent as the force of her words sank in. These were seasoned professionals who had dealt with countless royal situations. But the raw emotion and honesty in Camilla's voice gave them pause. "I have served this institution faithfully," she continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I have endured years of criticism, hatred, and scrutiny that would have broken many people. I have supported my husband through his transition to the throne, performed my duties with dignity, and tried to win over a nation that largely wishes I had never existed." Sir Geoffrey shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the truth in her words. "Ma'am, your service has been exemplary, and we all recognize the challenges you have faced." "Then help me find a solution," Camilla said, her voice pleading but determined. "Help me find a way to live the remainder of my life with some measure of peace and dignity, without feeling like I'm constantly under attack or surveillance." The officials exchanged glances, realizing that they were dealing with more than just a security breach or protocol violation. They were confronting the very real human cost of royal duty, and the toll it had taken on someone who had never asked for the scrutiny that came with her position. Lord Pemberton spoke first, his voice softer than before. "Ma'am, perhaps we could arrange for a temporary retreat, somewhere you could have privacy and peace while we explore longer-term solutions to address your concerns." It was the first suggestion that acknowledged her needs as a person rather than just her obligations as a royal, and Camilla felt a small spark of hope that perhaps there might be a way forward that honored both her humanity and her duties. The suggestion of a temporary retreat seemed to breathe new life into the tense atmosphere of the room. Camilla felt her shoulders relax slightly for the first time since James had discovered her packing. Here was someone finally acknowledging that she needed respite, not just management or containment. "What kind of arrangement are you thinking of?" she asked Lord Pemberton, cautious hope creeping into her voice. She had learned over the years not to get too excited about possibilities until she understood all the conditions and restrictions that might come with them. Lord Pemberton consulted briefly with Sir Geoffrey before responding. "There are several private estates owned by trusted friends of the Crown, where you could stay with minimal staff and maximum privacy. The security arrangements would be discreet but comprehensive, and your presence would not be publicized." Margaret Thornton looked up from her legal documents, her expression thoughtful. "From a constitutional standpoint, a temporary withdrawal for health and wellness reasons would be entirely appropriate and would not require any formal changes to your status or role." Camilla appreciated that they were framing it as health and wellness rather than as an escape from duty. Though she understood the political necessity of such language, the reality was that her mental and emotional health had indeed suffered under the constant pressure and criticism. "How temporary are we talking about?" she asked, needing to understand the parameters of what was being offered. "Days, weeks, months?" Sir Geoffrey stepped forward, his diplomatic experience evident in how he approached the delicate question. "Ma'am, I think that would largely depend on what you need to feel restored and ready to resume your duties, as well as what arrangements we can make to address some of the underlying concerns that led to this situation." The mention of addressing underlying concerns caught Camilla's attention. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, wondering if they might actually be willing to make substantive changes rather than just offering her a temporary escape. "Well," Sir Geoffrey continued carefully, "perhaps it's time we had serious discussions about how to better support you in your role. The media strategy, the selection of engagements, the level of protection from unfair criticism, these are all areas where improvements might be possible." James, who had been quietly observing from his position by the door, found himself impressed by the official's willingness to consider real solutions rather than just damage control. He had seen too many situations where the human element was ignored in favor of institutional preservation. Camilla walked to the window, looking out at the gardens that had provided her with so much solace over the years. The possibility of keeping some connection to this place while also gaining the freedom she craved was appealing, but she needed to understand exactly what was being offered. "I need to speak with Charles," she said finally, turning back to face the group. "This affects him as much as it affects me, and I won't make any decisions without his input and understanding." "Of course, ma'am," Sir Geoffrey agreed readily. "His Majesty should absolutely be involved in any decisions about your future arrangements. In fact, he's been notified of the situation and is on his way back from his morning appointments." The knowledge that Charles would soon be involved brought Camilla both relief and anxiety. Relief because she knew he would understand her feelings and support her needs, but anxiety because she hated adding to the burdens he already carried as the new monarch. Within the hour, King Charles III arrived at the palace with an expression of deep concern and love for his wife. He dismissed the officials temporarily so he could speak with Camilla privately, and James discreetly withdrew to give them space for their personal conversation. Charles took Camilla in his arms, and for the first time that day, she allowed herself to truly feel the emotions she had been holding back. The fear, the exhaustion, the desperate desire for peace, and it all came pouring out as she cried against his shoulder. "My darling," Charles said softly, stroking her hair, "why didn't you tell me how bad things had gotten? We could have addressed this together before it reached this point." "You have so much on your plate already," Camilla replied through her tears. "The transition to being king, all the responsibilities and challenges. I didn't want to add my problems to your burdens." Charles pulled back to look at her face, his eyes filled with love and determination. "Camilla, you are not a burden. You are my partner, my strength, and my greatest support. Your well-being is not a problem to be managed. It's my primary concern." They spent the next hour talking honestly about the pressures they had both been facing, the toll that royal life had taken on their relationship and their individual happiness, and their hopes for finding a way forward that would allow them both to serve the crown while preserving their humanity and peace of mind. When the officials returned, Charles and Camilla presented a united front in discussing possible solutions. Charles made it clear that his wife's well-being was his top priority and that he supported whatever arrangements would help her find peace and restoration. "We need to fundamentally reconsider how we approach the media and public relations around the Queen Consort," Charles stated firmly. "The level of criticism and personal attacks that Camilla has endured is unacceptable and counterproductive to the monarchy's goals." Sir Geoffrey nodded thoughtfully. "Your Majesty, we could certainly review our media strategy and consider ways to better protect Her Majesty from unfair attacks while still maintaining appropriate transparency and public engagement." Margaret Thornton had been taking notes throughout the conversation. "There are also legal avenues we could explore regarding particularly egregious media coverage, especially when it crosses the line into harassment or defamation." The discussion that followed was more productive than Camilla had dared to hope. Instead of just offering her a temporary escape, they were talking about real, systemic changes that might make her role more sustainable and enjoyable in the long term. Lord Pemberton outlined several options for immediate relief, including the temporary retreat idea, reduced public engagements for the next several months, and a complete review of her schedule and responsibilities to eliminate activities that were particularly stressful or unproductive. "What about the belongings that were packed?" Camilla asked, remembering the suitcase that had started this entire chain of events. James stepped forward respectfully. "Ma'am, everything has been cataloged and secured. If you decide to take a temporary retreat, those items could certainly accompany you, along with anything else you might need for your comfort and peace of mind." For the first time since that morning, Camilla felt genuine hope that there might be a path forward that honored both her needs as a human being and her responsibilities as Queen Consort. The suitcase that had represented escape might instead represent the beginning of a new approach to royal life, one that acknowledged the importance of personal well-being alongside public duty. 3 weeks later, Camilla found herself standing in the garden of Birkhall, the private Scottish estate that had become her temporary sanctuary. The morning mist was lifting from the Cairngorms Mountains in the distance, and the peace she felt was unlike anything she had experienced in years. The retreat had been exactly what she needed, a chance to step away from the constant scrutiny and rediscover who she was beneath the royal titles and expectations. The cottage was modest by royal standards, but perfectly suited to her needs. She had brought her dogs, some favorite books, and the personal items that James had helped her pack on that fateful morning weeks ago. The small staff consisted only of a housekeeper, a cook, and 2 discreet security officers who maintained their presence without intruding on her privacy. Charles visited whenever his schedule allowed, and their time together had been more relaxed and intimate than it had been in months. Without the constant pressure of official duties and public appearances, they had been able to reconnect as a couple and remember why they had chosen to face the world's challenges together. The media had been told that the Queen Consort was taking a brief retreat for health and wellness reasons, and surprisingly, the coverage had been generally sympathetic. Perhaps the palace's new media strategy was already having an effect, or perhaps the public was beginning to understand the human cost of the relentless criticism that had been directed at her. Camilla spent her days reading, walking with her dogs, and tending to a small garden that the estate's groundskeeper had helped her establish. The simple pleasure of working with her hands in the soil, watching plants grow and flourish under her care, was deeply therapeutic after years of feeling like everything she touched became subject to public debate and criticism. She had also been having regular video calls with Sir Geoffrey and the other palace officials, working collaboratively to design a new approach to her royal duties that would be more sustainable and fulfilling. The conversations were productive and respectful, focusing on finding ways to maximize her impact while minimizing the aspects of royal life that had been most draining. One morning, she received an unexpected visitor. James Morrison had driven up from London with some documents that required her attention, but Camilla sensed that there was more to his visit than official business. Captain Morrison, she greeted him warmly as he was shown into the cottage's comfortable sitting room. What a pleasant surprise. I hope the journey wasn't too difficult. James smiled, noting how relaxed and healthy she looked compared to that tense morning in the palace. Not at all, ma'am. The Scottish countryside is beautiful, and you look wonderfully well. They sat together with tea and homemade shortbread that the cook had prepared, and James updated her on various palace matters and security arrangements. But as their conversation continued, Camilla realized that he had something more personal to share. Ma'am, James said finally, I wanted to apologize for that morning when I had to intervene in your plans. I know it wasn't easy to have your privacy invaded, even though it was necessary for your safety. Camilla set down her teacup and looked at him with genuine warmth. Captain, you have nothing to apologize for. You were doing your job, and you did it with more compassion and respect than I had any right to expect. In fact, I've come to realize that your intervention may have saved me from making a decision I would have regretted. James looked surprised by her response. Ma'am, if I had simply run away, as I was planning to do, I would have left behind unfinished business and unresolved problems, she explained. More importantly, I would have missed the opportunity to work toward real solutions that might help not just me, but future members of the royal family who find themselves in similar situations. The conversation that followed was one of the most honest and meaningful exchanges Camilla had experienced since becoming Queen Consort. James shared his observations about the pressures facing the royal family and his admiration for her resilience and dedication. She spoke about her fears, her hopes, and her growing confidence that there might be a way to serve the crown while maintaining her personal well-being. I've been thinking a lot about duty, she said as they walked together through the garden later that afternoon. For so long I thought duty meant sacrifice, sacrificing my privacy, my peace of mind, my personal happiness for the sake of the institution. But I'm beginning to understand that true duty might mean finding a way to serve effectively while also taking care of myself. James nodded thoughtfully. Ma'am, if I may say so, you've always struck me as someone who leads by example. Perhaps your willingness to address these issues openly will help create a healthier environment for everyone involved in royal service. As the day progressed, they discussed the practical aspects of her eventual return to royal duties. The new arrangements that had been negotiated would significantly reduce her public appearances, focusing on the causes and activities that brought her the most satisfaction and where she could make the greatest impact. The media strategy had been completely overhauled, with a new communications team specifically dedicated to protecting the royal family from unfair attacks, while still maintaining appropriate transparency. Legal action was being considered against publications that crossed the line into harassment or defamation. Most importantly, regular wellness checks and support systems were being established for all members of the royal family, recognizing that the unique pressures of their positions required specialized understanding and care. "When do you think you'll be ready to return?" James asked as they prepared for his departure back to London. Camilla considered the question carefully. "Soon, I think. Maybe another week or two. I feel stronger and more centered than I have in years, and I'm actually looking forward to the work ahead. The difference is that now I know I have support and that my well-being matters to the people I work with." As James prepared to leave, Camilla asked him to wait a moment and disappeared into the cottage. She returned with a small wrapped package. "This is for you," she said, handing him the gift. "A small token of my appreciation for your professionalism and compassion during a very difficult time." James unwrapped the package to find a beautiful, leather-bound journal with his initials embossed on the cover. Inside the front cover, Camilla had written a personal note thanking him for his service and expressing her gratitude for his kindness during her crisis. "Ma'am, this is incredibly thoughtful but not necessary," James said, clearly moved by the gesture. "It's very necessary," Camilla replied firmly. "You helped me realize that even in the most rigid institutions, there's room for human kindness and understanding. That's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life." As James drove back toward London, he reflected on the remarkable transformation he had witnessed. The woman who had been desperately packing to escape her life was now planning her return with renewed purpose and confidence. The intervention that had seemed like a betrayal of her autonomy had ultimately led to positive changes that would benefit not just her, but the entire institution she served. 6 months later, Camilla stood in the same room where James had discovered her packing that life-changing morning. But now, instead of a suitcase filled with escape plans, the room held carefully organized schedules for a new approach to royal life that she had helped design. The difference was remarkable. She was no longer running from her responsibilities, but actively shaping them. The Queen Consort's return to royal duties had been carefully orchestrated and widely celebrated. The public had responded positively to her renewed energy and apparent happiness, and even some of her harshest critics had begun to acknowledge the positive changes in her approach and demeanor. The new system they had implemented was working better than anyone had dared to hope. Camilla's public engagements had been reduced by nearly half, but the ones she did attend were chosen specifically for their alignment with her passions and expertise. She focused primarily on literacy programs, support for victims of domestic violence, and animal welfare causes that were close to her heart. The media strategy had been revolutionized as well. Instead of reactive damage control, the palace now proactively shared positive stories about the royal family's work and impact. When unfair attacks did occur, they were addressed swiftly and professionally, making it clear that harassment would not be tolerated. Perhaps most importantly, the entire royal household had embraced a new culture that prioritized the well-being of family members alongside their duties to the crown. Regular check-ins, mental health support, and flexibility in scheduling had become standard practices rather than emergency interventions. James had been promoted to Deputy Head of Royal Protection, partly in recognition of his handling of the crisis that could have become a scandal, but instead became an opportunity for positive change. He often reflected on that morning and how a potential disaster had transformed into one of the most meaningful experiences of his career. On this particular morning, James was conducting his regular security briefing when he received word that the Queen Consort wanted to see him in her study. As he made his way through the familiar corridors, he wondered what she might need to discuss. He found Camilla at her desk, writing in a leather-bound journal, not unlike the one she had given him months earlier. She looked up as he entered, her face brightening with the genuine warmth that had become her trademark since her return. "Captain Morrison, thank you for coming," she said, rising to greet him. "I have something rather special to share with you today." James noticed several official-looking documents on her desk, along with what appeared to be a manuscript of some kind. Camilla gestured for him to sit in the comfortable chair across from her desk. "I've been working on a project during my quieter moments," she began, her voice filled with enthusiasm. A memoir of sorts focusing on the importance of mental health and well-being in high-pressure careers. I want to share what I've learned about finding balance and seeking help when you need it. James was intrigued but not entirely surprised. Camilla had always been someone who wanted to use her experiences to help others, and her recent journey had given her unique insights that could benefit many people facing similar challenges. "That sounds like a wonderful project, ma'am," he said sincerely. "Your story could help a lot of people who are struggling with the pressures of their own responsibilities." Camilla smiled and picked up the manuscript. "The book will include a chapter about the morning you found me packing, and how your intervention, though difficult at the time, ultimately led to positive changes not just for me, but for the entire institution. I wanted to make sure you were comfortable with being mentioned in that context." James felt honored that she wanted to include their interaction in her book. "Ma'am, if sharing that story can help other people or institutions recognize the importance of supporting their people during difficult times, then I'm proud to be part of it." "I was hoping you'd say that," Camilla replied, her eyes twinkling with satisfaction, "because I have another request to make of you." She picked up one of the official documents from her desk and handed it to him. James read through it quickly, his eyes widening as he realized what he was looking at. "Ma'am, this is," he began, clearly surprised by what he was reading. "An invitation for you to become a special advisor on royal family well-being and security," Camilla finished for him. "The position would involve working with all members of the royal family to ensure that security arrangements take into account not just physical safety, but emotional and mental well-being as well." James was stunned. The position would be a significant advancement in his career, but more importantly, it would allow him to help prevent others from reaching the crisis point that Camilla had experienced. "You showed exceptional judgment and compassion during one of the most difficult moments of my life," Camilla continued. "You understood that sometimes protecting someone means helping them address the root causes of their distress, not just managing the symptoms. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need as we continue to evolve and improve how we support the royal family." The conversation that followed was detailed and exciting as Camilla outlined her vision for the new position and how it would work within the existing palace structure. James would work closely with medical professionals, counselors, and senior palace officials to create comprehensive support systems for all members of the royal family. "There's one more thing," Camilla said as their meeting drew to a close. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a small wrapped package. "Another gift. But this one is different from the journal I gave you before." James unwrapped the package to find a beautifully crafted compass with an inscription that read, "For helping me find my true north with gratitude and respect, Camilla R." "Ma'am, this is extraordinary," James said, clearly moved by the thoughtful gift and its meaningful inscription. "You help me remember that true duty isn't about suffering in silence or sacrificing your well-being for the sake of appearances," Camilla explained. "It's about finding sustainable ways to serve effectively while maintaining your humanity and compassion. You helped me find my way back to my true purpose." As James left Camilla's study that day, he carried with him not just the exciting prospects of his new role, but also the satisfaction of knowing that a crisis had been transformed into an opportunity for positive change. The woman who had once packed a suitcase to escape her life was now actively working to improve the system for everyone who would come after her. The palace corridors that had once witnessed Camilla's desperate attempt to flee now echoed with the footsteps of someone who had found her way home, not to a physical place, but to a sense of purpose and belonging that honored both her personal needs and her commitment to service. The story that had begun with a guard seizing belongings to prevent an escape had evolved into something far more meaningful, a testament to the power of compassion, understanding, and the courage to seek change when change is needed. It was a reminder that even the most rigid institutions could evolve and improve when guided by genuine care for the people who serve within them. And in the end, the suitcase that had once represented escape became a symbol of transformation, proving that sometimes the journey home begins with the courage to acknowledge that change is necessary, and that true strength lies not in suffering in silence, but in seeking help and working together to create better solutions for everyone.